Welcome to Connecting Communities, a Beyond the Blog podcast generously funded by the Patterson Foundation. We're here to bring you insights and inspiration from the Suncoast campaign for grade level reading and more. In each episode, we'll explore how communities come together to support the success of children and families, and to empower the parents, caregivers, educators, and organizations who care so deeply about them. Thanks for joining us. My name is Leah Verier-Dunn, and today we're discussing attendance, an important pillar of the Suncoast campaign for grade level reading. Attending school regularly is essential for students to gain the academic and social skills they need to succeed. Chronic absenteeism, defined as missing more than 10% of the work covered in class, leaves third graders unable to read proficiently, sixth graders struggling with coursework, and high school students off track for graduation. With me today, to help us learn about the gravity of chronic absenteeism and offer some insight on improving attendance, is the Executive Director and President of Attendance Works, Hedy Chang. Welcome to Connecting Communities, Hedy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my pleasure, Leah.
So before we dive into the issue of chronic absence, I'm hoping you can share a bit more about Attendance Works, what the organization does, and the work you're doing there.
Yeah, so Leah, we are a nonprofit initiative. We operate virtually, actually. So we actually operate nationwide. Attendance Works was launched because when we got started, no one knew that chronic absence was even an issue or metric we should notice. And chronic absence we define as missing 10% or more of school for any reason. But that's not something we've long looked at as a country. When I first started this work in 2006, we took attendance paper and pencil. People couldn't even calculate this metric. By about 2010, now I'm showing my age, you had longitudinal student data systems and people took attendance, but they only paid attention to unexcused absences. They didn't look at absences for any reason. And Attendance Works got started because we started collecting research that showed when kids missed 10% or more of school, starting in kindergarten, it actually led to those problematic outcomes that you started this podcast off with. But no one noticed because no one was looking at it. And if it's a number of kids, then you got to notice a pattern. You have to think about more programmatic policy solutions. And so in the beginning, all of our work was like, we wanted people to know this is a problem. You need to notice it. If you don't notice it, you can't take action on it. And then we managed to get this data all over the place, partly because we worked in a number of communities across the country to show that if you took this data, you can make a difference. And now this is a metric that you hear about all the time. And so actually people are pretty aware. I mean, chronic absence, we got it calculated before the pandemic started, and we knew at that time it was like 1 out of 6 kids. It rose to about 1 out of 3 in 21, 22. It's still about 1 out of 4 kids nationwide, so a lot higher. But now one big difference is a lot of people realize kids not showing up to school is a challenge. It's in newspaper articles all over the place. And what people are looking for is solutions. So that's the other part of what Attendance Works does. We use our connections across the country to innovate solutions as well as catalyze research about what works. And then when we find out what are the things that are working, we share them through our webinars. We have a National Attendance Awareness Campaign webinar. We have almost 4,000 people signing up for those webinars, a couple thousand showing up to any one. And the idea for Attendance Works is we're a catalyst organization. We're just a couple dozen people at most, Moving attendance across the country means everyone on the ground is look at their data, noticing kids, and also creating schools that are warm, welcoming places where kids want to be. What we try to do is equip people, because our website, all our resources, anything that we can offer virtually is free so that people can make this their own. I often say to people, the key to getting kids to show up is really knowing the families, the communities, the culture, and the language. I can't know that. Folks in Suncoast and Sarasota and Manatee in your communities can know that. But at the same time, you don't want to start from scratch. If you start from scratch to create what works, you're going to be so tired. You never get a chance to even tailor this to what you know about kids and families. We can get you probably 80% of the way. Go on our website, find one of our flyers, take it, adapt it, make sure that it works for you. Don't start from scratch because then you'll never get around to doing the important part, which is usually about really connecting with kids and families and talking to them and building trust and relationships.
It sounds like you have a lot of work focused towards helping school systems understand these things, but also that your resources really are something that parents and families can access so that they deepen their understanding of the importance of attendance.
We do have family-facing resources. And we produce flyers and handouts for families in multiple languages. So, for example, we have, tips on, we'll have flyers that help families know why showing up to school matters so much. What are some of the things they can do? We also have materials that, especially post-COVID, we started creating a whole wealth of health related resources. So I remember, so one of the challenges with COVID is that families started thinking that you should keep your kid home for any symptom of illness, and you should keep them home for a long time because we had pretty lengthy quarantine,
Yeah.
guidance coming out. And then things shift. You still have COVID, but it's not as deadly. And at least when I read the resources from physicians and from CDC, it's really shifted the guidance. But I'm gonna admit that I'm not sure always the resources that are published are easily understandable. So I would read them and go, I'm not sure I understand what they're saying to me. We need to create some easy to understand resources that families can understand and that are in their home languages. And so we actually brought a physician on staff, Dr. Eliot, because I was worried, and I also knew I'm not a physician. Like I do want to make it simpler, but I'm a little worried about it coming from me, who's not a physician. So we brought Eliot on board. We partner with Kaiser Permanente, the National Association of School Nurses. Eliot used his connections to the American Academy of Pediatrics to run things by colleagues who are pediatricians. So we made sure that when we simplified, we didn't make it inaccurate. But now, for example, we have a great short flyer. How sick is too sick? Like, when do you really stay home from school? And so, for example, I mean, this was an issue before the pandemic, but when kids are anxious, they often have headaches and stomach aches. And already before the pandemic, particularly with our little ones, like our 4 and 5 year olds, families are like, I'll keep my kid. When actually, that's not always the solution. You actually want the routine of school. That's part of what they're learning. And by going to school, developing connections to peers, making sure, getting engaged in the curriculum, building relationships to the teachers in the building, that's actually what gets you through the anxiety. Staying home, actually, the anxiety just gets worse. So we
Yeah.
needed to help people. We also have a flyer, by the way, on anxiety. You know, so, because if you know your kid is anxious, the solution then is to find out why the kid is anxious and then partner with your teacher to address it. Is it bullying? Is it that they're struggling with a concept in class and they're kind of embarrassed? I don't know. It could be a myriad of issues, but you got to go notice it for what it is and not just keep them home. And so we both have short guidance that says, only still go to school unless you've got a high fever again. Fever, you've got something really contagious, stay home. I mean, there are times when you should stay home,
Right.
but there are many times, a sniffle can be you have allergies. Staying home isn't going to change that, and you should still be in school. So, how do you help families make that tough decision? When do you send your kid to school? And when you keep them home because they're really sick and it's not good for them or for other kids? And how do we then create easy to use materials So that is not hard for families to look at. What I will say though, is that we see our primary audience as the educators, community partners, the people who work with families. So while we do have these materials, and certainly a family member could go on our website and look at our handouts, we think the power is in equipping educators, community partners, health providers to actually use these. Like if you could have a doctor's office and this flyer sitting in the doctor's office, not everyone goes on a website to get something. Many families, that's not where they go find the information. And often it's better if you're looking at the information and you're getting it from someone you trust.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I would really encourage educators to look at our materials and see what resonates with them, given what they know their families need, because it's the combination of relationship and information that helps shift mindsets and shift behavior. It's not just getting handed out some written piece of information.
Yeah, I think the relationship piece is so important because I'm thinking of myself as a parent to two kids. There's a, I'm lucky to be involved in work where I'm learning about the importance of attendance, but then there are some things that may or may not get communicated clearly enough for me to understand the importance of attendance beyond just my two children, the effect that has on a classroom when kids are missing constantly, and how a teacher has to jump and change, or the attendance at the beginning of the year when I know some communities do 5-day counts or 10-day counts for those first few weeks of school, and if your kids are not counted in their seat that day, or at least one day the first week of school, that changes the resources the school might get. So there's all these sort of trickling effects from attendance that most parents just don't know because we're not talked to about it. So as you've sort of mentioned health as one of the main contributors, what are some other common contributors to chronic absence? What else are we seeing?
We see the reasons for absence as falling into four buckets.
Okay.
One is barriers. And this particularly affects low income communities, but not just low income communities. Unstable housing, a lack of a safe path to school, lack of access to health care. For older kids, it could be they have to work because they're trying to, supplement the family income. If you had trauma, a death in the family can create, kind of a barrier. So those are barriers. The second is aversion. Whatever is happening in school is actually pushing you out. You've got bullying, you've got poor school climate, sometimes the anxiety issues that kids face, that we're not finding ways to easily resolve, that can create an issue. The third is disengagement. What's happening in school doesn't feel meaningful and relevant, and I don't have peers or adults that make me want to come to school. The fourth issue is misconceptions. And so you don't realize that just missing 2 days a month actually can throw you off course individually, for reading, for achievement, for graduation, even executive functioning skills. And frankly, sometimes I think post-pandemic, people think, oh, I can just make up for it online. When some of the skill building that we're doing is what happens when you're in in-person interaction. It's not just what you're getting online. Online can be a benefit to learning, but it's not the whole of learning. Schools are much more learning, especially like that social development, executive functioning skills. That's really something that we need to look at. Or again, as I said, I'm going to stay home for any symptom of illness. Those issues can affect a lot of kids. And so we see those the barriers, aversion, disengagement, and misconceptions as big issues. Now, the truth is, people are complicated and life is complicated. So, what is causing any particular kid to miss school? Maybe some mix of factors, and you actually need to know that kid and the family to know what's going on. But we can use our data. So, I think about this as another campaign for grade level reading community, Arizona, Read on Arizona. And they had noticed using their data that chronic absence was really high in their housing projects.
Mm.
And they felt like one issue was a safety issue, walking to the bus stop. So they created these, I think they called them attendance angels, where the residents bonded together and they would walk the kids to the bus stop. But then they discovered another issue. There actually wasn't enough buses to take the kids. So, and part of the issue is, I don't know, this sounds kind of crazy. If my memory of the story is correct, they didn't have a long enough space. They could only put one bus there. So literally the solution was to paint a longer, color on the sidewalk so that then, and bring in another bus, and then all the kids got to school, and that helped to significantly reduce your chronic absence issue.
Wow.
So figure out where the challenge is. You got to involve the community in solving it. You got to assess whether your solution is fully working. In this case, it was only a partial solution because you just needed enough bus to get all the kids there. And then but it's not rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't going to be a solution where you solved it one kid by one kid. This actually needed a programmatic solution in order to significantly change the situation.
It feels like attendance really is low-hanging fruit in some senses, but it requires us to understand that it's important before we can, grab it and find the solutions for it. So what an interesting story to identify that, whoa, there was this like one issue that if we just communicated and figured it out together, we can resolve it for that classroom of students or that, that group of students at that school. I'm hopeful that as attendance work spreads more awareness and we really start to help people identify the importance of attendance in school, that we'll be able to find more solutions that are within reach and that they're not such giant grabs to solve those problems. You talked some already about the effects of absence early on. I know that a lot of chronic absenteeism really happens in kindergarten and in those primary grades, where I think a lot of people might think it's actually happening in high school, or a high school senior who's ready to be done. What can you share about the outcomes that happen with patterns, of absence starting at such an early age, at such an early time in a kid's school experience?
Yeah. And I just want to go back to that misperception too, and then go into that. That's actually why we needed to create this metric of chronic absence. So I think the perception on it being older kids is because we only looked at unexcused absences. But when you think about a 5-year-old doesn't miss school and like on their own is wandering about the street. Right. That's just not what's happening, And usually an adult may call in. Often if an adult calls in and says, my kid's not there, and people don't realize it's not about being excused or unexcused. If you miss that much time consistently, 10% of the school, there are just worse outcomes. You're less likely to be reading by the end of third grade. You're less likely to have executive functioning skills. You're less likely to be engaged. There's a lot of great research by a guy named Michael Godfrey that said, the kids who are chronically absent at the end of kindergarten were less engaged in learning. So there's an engagement factor. And we know that this is data from Chicago, the kids who were chronically absent in kindergarten were like 5 times more likely to be chronically absent the subsequent year, because there's something about building foundational skills. But you also got this issue of, if you're chronically absent, let's say in kindergarten first, now you're not reading by the end of third grade. And by the way, attendance often starts to improve in third grade. Kids are less sick, it's easier to get to school, some sets of things. But you're now not reading by the end of third grade. You're now not engaging in the classroom. By the time you're in middle school, maybe you don't want to go to school because you aren't feeling like you can catch up. You're not feeling valuable in school. You're not learning in school. And now you may be causing trouble in the classroom. Isn't it easier to cause trouble than to admit you don't know how to read? Well, right? Like sometimes, at least from a kid perspective, that may feel less, and so I think what happened, and there is some evidence that the kids it looks like it gets better, but it actually isn't getting better and it's getting worse. And then we pay later because now they're in high school and they have huge amounts of remediation, which is now much more costly to provide in order to make sure that kids get up. And then the other thing there's consequences. And you mentioned this earlier. We have more and more research that shows when we have high levels of chronic absence, it's not just a chronically absent student whose well-being is actually affected because it is harder for teachers to teach, kids to learn. And there was research done in, I think it was Delaware, that showed high levels of chronic absence in the early grades. The peer effects outweighed even the individual effects.
Wow.
So chronic absence is something we all have a vested interest in addressing. And one of the challenges, again, I think the anxiety issues, the parent engagement, folks recognizing we still have some challenges where folks might, it's not they don't want their kids to succeed. They might not understand that showing up to school every day in kindergarten is so crucial to developing the both academic but also social skills that will allow kids to be successful. There's a couple things that we've seen work. When you do, because relationships matter a lot, when you do like parent-teacher home visits where teachers visit kids' families before school starts to forge a bond, and actually you don't talk about attendance then. You just build a relationship with family, talk about hopes and dreams, make sure the family knows who the teacher is, and talk about how you're going to partner. And attendance can come up maybe naturally in it, but it's not an attendance visit. It's a relationship visit. So that later on, if stuff comes up, everyone feels like they can talk to each other. That's actually known to reduce chronic absence. We know relationships truly are essential. There's going to be some emerging research not yet released out of Chicago, and they're showing that school climate issues, um, while they were important before pandemic, they're even more important. So peer-to-peer supports, the sense of trust that parents have. In fact, they also did this work in Chicago, actually Illinois. This was Learning Heroes, where they found that the schools with higher levels of high quality family engagement had lower increases in chronic absence than the schools with not such good family engagement. So family engagement matters a ton. And another strategy that schools can use is they can make, most people still in kindergarten, first, second, they're still having parent-teacher conferences. What if you made sure attendance was always part of every parent-teacher conference, where I say, hey, Leah, your son missed these days. When they missed these days, this is what we were learning in class. Both, how do we make sure that he gets a chance to learn this, but also I want you to understand when they weren't there, or maybe the challenge is you're getting there an hour late every day because getting up the stuff is just hard. Well, you're missing out on the literacy block every morning. We have to help families understand when their kid's not there, what are they missing?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you help them get there? And then the other thing I will say, in California, we had this fabulous project where we partnered with a group called the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and we looked across all the 1,000 districts to find a set of 20 districts that had higher levels of attendance in kindergarten, lower levels of chronic absence before and after the pandemic. And then we got to go visit a few of these districts to see what they did. And one of them, Livingston, it was so amazing. The teachers had built in connecting to kids and talking about attendance just as part of the regular morning routine. So one teacher, she would draw a heart and she'd talk about, here are the two kids who are missing. And aren't we so sad they're not here? And when they come back, let's warmly welcome back. And at the end of a day, teachers would talk about what are they going to learn. They had a school nurse, a district nurse in school, so that anytime, and I actually witnessed this, kid with the stomach ache, but then goes to the school nurse to make sure, and then typically the kids still stayed in school because the stomachache wasn't a reason to come. Or if families were worried about the kid, not whether they could be well enough, they could call the school and the nurse would say, come, uh, just let me check your kid out and I'll tell you whether or not they should come or not. They also made things like I remember there was they had buddies. I remember watching this little kid who just didn't like this kid didn't want to come out of the car, but then they connect him with the buddy. The buddy walks him all the way to the classroom. So you use kids to support each other. I was in a parent meeting and the kid who was a buddy was talking about how proud they were to be the buddy. I mean, it was the most adorable thing.
Yeah, and the benefit that has of for the older kid, maybe if it's like older, younger child or whatever, just to create that community together. And when you feel like you're a part of something, you want to show up more than if you don't feel like you're a part of something. So that engagement piece is just
The other thing these schools did, which I think may, unfortunately, given the challenges around school shootings that have happened in Florida, which I want to say that happened simultaneous with the pandemic. So people's fears, schools should be safe places. The combination of those actual incidents, along with huge media attention to them, which you should, but then the other challenge of it is it makes us all more fearful, whether or not it's really happening in our schools or not. But in this case, like you actually have schools that are now surrounded by gates, and families can't walk onto school campuses easily. You gotta, be let in from the gate. It's pretty daunting. And so in this school, the staff would position themselves at morning drop off outside the gate. The principal was welcoming the families. If the kid was like reluctant to get in the car, my literally helping the kid get out of the car and bringing them into school. But it's a 20-minute investment that conveyed caring, conveying love, allowed for building relationships. They also created a place where the kindergartners in particular had a different entrance because so that the parents could, when they dropped off, meet the teacher. So we have to think about, I mean, we do have these security measures and they have some unintended consequences that are challenging for parent engagement. And so then how do we overcome them, whether that's these kinds of strategies or even the kind of how we use virtual means, texting, with parents to just make sure they still have a sense of what kids are learning and are connected to classrooms.
absolutely. It's such an important point to bring that up about our fears of security because it does have these effects that maybe we're not paying attention to, and it's really changing the culture of how much we show up at school or in school to get to know our teachers, our administrators, the staff at the school. And then there's such a disconnect. And like we were talking about before, if there isn't that sense of community, it's really hard for children, adults to want to show up because you don't have skin in the game in the same way.
Well, and the other thing it affects is relationships between parents.
Absolutely.
As a parent myself, I will say, I remember when my car broke down and I'm on the way to school and I'm not dropping off, but we had a pretty active, organized parents led soccer team, so and truthfully, not because we were all working parents, not all of us could get to pick the kids up. So we all had each other's cell phone numbers. So when my kid then I'm stuck, I'm like, okay, I don't want the car breakdown to affect my kid's attendance. I can just text another parent, are you on the way? Can you pick up my kid, please? Get them to school while I deal with this. But that means if parents, and there is actually research that shows when there's more robust networks of mutual support among parents, kids are more likely to get to school. Because, we all know stuff, it's hard to get it's hard to be a parent on your own, getting your kid to school. You really need a village. And especially if we're not living near other family members, we got to create a village for ourselves. So then how do schools, one thing we do, if folks don't have it, we have this this resource on our website, which is both parents could use, but teachers can use, and it's called a help bank. And so what you do, it's concentric circles. You think about who's the everyday person who gets my kid to school, who's the occasional helper, who's my emergency helper. And what you want to do is construct your help bank before your kid's going to school that year. Because if we have that help bank, you know how to, and if a school sees that parents cannot help fill out this help bank, they ought to think about, how am I creating family activities where families get to know each other? Or if you have kids coming from different parts of the city, because sometimes schools aren't just serving one neighborhood, how would you do that? But then the other thing we've seen is, how can you maybe introduce a help bank as part of welcome back to school night? You don't want
Yes.
to introduce the help bank after the problems are happening. You want to make this something universal that everyone fills out. And then you could even reinforce it in a parent-teacher conference. A parent's noticing the kids having struggles, and lateness can be part of the fact that you don't have a system of support to get your kid to school. Um, so, then you can say, hey, have you ever had a help bank? Maybe this is something to do. You might even, I've heard of teachers who know two families. Hey, did you know the other family who lives down the road? They're pretty close to you. If you don't know them, I'm happy to connect you to them. I mean, we need to find these ways that schools are centers of community, because that's what helps kids and families thrive in general, and in specific to this one, show up to school every day.
Yeah, it's just sort of directing a little more investment in creating those relationships so that we can have these help banks, have these other systems in place to support each other.
So I think this is one thing that we are, I don't have research to show this, but it's my common sense. I think we took a lot of this relationship building for granted before the pandemic. When the pandemic happened and we were all isolated in our homes, and even if it was only for that spring, but even when you went back to school, there was so much checking for COVID. Our relationships, even if schools were open, didn't continue. I would suspect it's taken a long time for people to get back to the level of socialization they happened. And I think at schools that's true. And I think that schools thought that once we reopened, relationship building would just happen again. But it didn't. It actually takes intentionality to support relationships, teacher to family, kid to kid, family to family. That whole thing, and the places, this is why that research from Chicago was so important. The places that even before the pandemic were more intentional about it did better during the pandemic, because they had the mechanisms to reestablish those relationships. And I think more and more schools have to be very intentional about relationship building, but data on chronic absence gives you clues about where you have to invest those relationship building activities and resources the most.
So, with what you've just been sharing, are there any specific recommendations for teachers, school staff, administrators that you think you could offer to give them sort of a springboard for action heading in the direction that you've been talking about?
Take a look at your communications around attendance with families. We have a history of blaming negative truancy notifications in this country. Leah, you didn't show up to school, and basically sort of an insinuation that you don't care about your kid's education. And as soon as you get it, you're like angry at me and alienated. Take a look at how you communicate with families. What we did this thing in actually LA. In California, where I live, though we work nationally, we had mandated language so that if a kid missed 3 days or 3 times late by 30 minutes, they'd get this notification of truancy. Part of the notification truancy, what basically was a threat to take the family to court if attendances didn't improve. That does not generate a positive relationship. We tried using that notification. We also got permission to squish it to the bottom of the letter in small font. And instead, we wrote this not legalese, because the other one was pretty legalese, easy to understand. Hey, your kid missed these days. Does that seem right? We're worried because this could affect their attendance. We want to help you. Can we talk to you? That letter had a 40% better attendance than the traditional truancy notification. So what we know from common sense, you start with blame and negativity, you're not going to build a relationship, and we can prove it with some research. So check those notifications and make sure that you're reaching out to families and not actually almost undermining yourself before you have a chance. And then I'd say build in positive messaging to families all year long. Figure out how you can do that for and relationship building in your parent teacher, your back to school stuff. You can do stuff all through and we actually have materials on our website. This isn't a one-shot thing. This is about building a culture of engagement, relationship building, and attendance throughout the year. And think about what you do when you welcome kids to school, making sure that folks don't take too long during the holidays, but feel welcomed back. Make sure that if you know there's going to be like cold and allergy season, you're giving them good guidance about stuff. If you think you're going to start getting rain, make sure that people have rain gear. I mean, there's not lots of ways, but you're offering a sense of support, engagement, and reminding people about the critical importance of showing up to school every day.
I love all of those suggestions because it really just boils down to the language and the spirit in which we're communicating with families to let them know that we are standing with them, not against them in this, fight for growth towards better attendance. And now it's time for big picture, small steps. I'll start with the big picture. What would you say or identify as your long-term goals for attendance?
The one thing we have set out as an organization is a 50% challenge. So we did this actually in partnership with the American Enterprise Institute and Education Trust. So one issue is this has got to be cross-partisan, bipartisan, nonpartisan, whatever you do. This is not a Democrat, not a Republican, not any party issue. This is an all of us issue. So we partnered AEI, if folks know American Enterprise Institute is a little bit right-leaning, and Trust is a little left-leaning. We're trying to be not leaning anyway, but we felt like if we partnered together and said, we as a country have to, chronic absence nearly doubled during the pandemic, we need to now reduce it by 50% over the next 5 years. And so we set that goal knowing that it doesn't happen overnight, and you're going to have consistent attendance over time. So that is still our long-term goal. So we're now probably the second year into that 5 years.
Okay.
And we encouraged states to join, but it doesn't just have to be at the state level. It can be a district, it can be a school. I've seen schools actually reduce that. I would say you still want to even go more further if you've reduced it by 50%,
Right.
but that was an initial way of just getting people to conceptualize what they could do and recognize it's not just about doing it 1 year, it's sustaining this work over time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I feel like once you get that 50%, you realize, oh, this is actually attainable if we keep our efforts up there. So now for our small steps, this is for the families that are listening. What are a few simple things that they can do starting today that will help improve attendance awareness or reduce chronic absenteeism for maybe themselves or, the families that they're connected with?
First, I think families should take a moment to really appreciate why going to school just matters so much. And we have a saying, showing up matters for real. The R is about routines, because being in routine is so crucial for young kids, for learning, for actually when things get chaotic. The E is for engagement, because in school, that's where you have your peers, your adults. The A is access to resources, whether that's fun after school and sports and music and curricular activities, but it can also be access to health services and mental health services. And the L is for learning. So one is families should really think about, why does showing up to school matter, and start to convey that message to their kids. The second thing I would say is I would encourage families to come up with what's their plan for getting their help back.
Yeah.
How do they monitor? How do they take steps? So that's on a more individual level.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also think it's a good idea for families to find out what's happening around chronic absence in their school. And if it's high, see whether they can play a role in helping identify what are those barriers or challenges, and helping come up with good solutions. Like maybe there isn't a safe path. but maybe you can do a walking school bus to school. Maybe you do have challenges with access to health services, and maybe you can find a way to partner with a local community clinic to make sure those health services are available for kids and families, or at least there's a referral. Maybe, as we talked about in my Arizona example, it's a transportation issue. And you can think about how do you work with the district to work that out. So we need both families supporting their own kids, but we need also families being part of the community that comes up with solutions for all their kids.
Hedy, I want to thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. At the Patterson Foundation, we talk about sharing our cookies, which is like all of the knowledge that we have and making sure that we're sharing that out. And you have done that so generously while you've been with us today. So thank you for all that you've offered our listeners. We really appreciate you being here.
Leah, can I just do a couple shout outs to the
Please.
Patterson Foundation?
Yeah, please do.
The Patterson Foundation has been so fabulous. It was really with their support that I think I was able to come to South Coast and help folks in the area recognize and calculate their numbers. But you've also had a lot of really wonderful activities going on. Sarasota Public Housing Authority has done really nice work. And Beth Duda in particular, she's done such great work trying to, all the art projects, the attendance awareness campaigns where they can do contests, and that's part the great messaging, but you're actually allowing kid voice to be part of that messaging. I remember you also had a really great health video at one point. It was teaching kids how to sneeze into their arms and not, spread contagious stuff. But all of that is all really doable. And then the last thing I would just say is, the Patterson Foundation it's been a while since I've been into Sarasota, but I have heard about things that have gone on even in more recent years. And I think that's because there's even more local capacity these days and people taking on and doing the work. And I think for me, a sign of success is when people are able to just easily use resources, or they come up with their own. And so I also encourage everyone in Sarasota, because you all are innovators. Sarasota, Manatee, the whole Suncoast region. I've been to the less counties, so you guys all have to forgive me for not remembering all the names. But as you come up with innovation, I'd love for folks locally to share back with us, because what we're able to do at Attendance Works is to share inspiring stories of what works across the country so people can see this can happen in every community.
We are so focused on shared aspirations, and with the Suncoast campaign for grade level reading, we know that the success of our students in our Suncoast region, Sarasota, Manatee, DeSoto, and Charlotte counties, that it's something that all of us, everyone in our community shares the desire to have our students meet the success that they deserve. So having resources like Attendance Works and partners like Attendance Works and you, and then being under the leadership of Beth Duda, of course, I see our progression over time, and we're just so grateful to be a part of doing all of this work with you. So thank you. Listeners, showing up matters. Understanding the impact of chronic absenteeism and embracing the power of attendance awareness brings us one step closer to a future where all children can reach their full potential. Remember, every day counts. To close, here's a thought about today's subject from a kid in our region.
Connecting with kids.
Do you think it's important to go to school?
Definitely.
Connecting Communities is a Beyond the Blog podcast, generously supported by the Patterson Foundation. To learn more about this podcast, the work of the Patterson Foundation, or the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading, please visit thepattersonfoundation.org and grade-level-reading suncoast.net. Thanks for listening.